Let's have a look at what is making the front pages of our newspapers this morning. Joining us live is Mark Kenny, Senior Fellow at the ANU Australian Studies Institute. Mark, good to see you. Let's look at the front page of the Australian newspaper, and this is carried on many of our mastheads this morning. The headline, ASIO uncovers sleeper agent running spy ring. This is just one angle in this update from ASIO. Mike Burgess had warnings on many fronts yesterday.
Yeah, that's the case, Laura. We've had this assessment of the threat from the head of ASIO, and it does make for sort of bleak reading, I suppose. He's saying that the level of threat is extremely high it remains high from Islamic terrorists or people sympathetic with that. It also remains high from what they call right-wing extremism, neo-Nazis and others motivated by, the sort of right-wing hate agenda. That there are foreign governments that are continuing to interfere, that continue to wish to do Australia harm, and that have gone to all kinds of very sophisticated lengths, really, to gain access to Australia, to gain access to campuses, to gain access to computer networks and the like, as you say, running sleeper agents and spy rings and so forth. So it's, in terms of overall volume of activity, he says it's unprecedented, and that's quite significant.
How much of a surprise is it for you, Mark? I mean, there is talk of sleeper agents preying on dissidents, and Mike Burgess in that particular part didn't really name a country, but is the undercurrent there that it may well be China? Because we have reported extensively over the past few months anyway that there are Chinese agents well and truly out there in Australia.
Yes, well, that's obviously one of the suspicions that people will have as a result of reading this. I have no doubt that China is among the countries, perhaps principal among the countries that are operating, state-based operations or state-sponsored operations of intelligence in Australia. That would be no surprise. And it does have a very extensive community in Australia, and that's very well latched into our economy. So, the potential, at least, you would think, is there for those sorts of operations to exist, and it would not be inconsistent with what we know about the Chinese state. We might as well call that for what it is. But there are other states also, Russia, and you could name a few others in the Middle East and elsewhere that may also be using these sorts of tactics. And look, I think probably the thing we can say about all this is that security agencies will always tend to see the risk. That is their job. They will also tend to talk their own book in the sense of needing more resources, the threat level being high. But I don't think we can just simply dismiss these comments by Mike Burgess, on those grounds alone. I think no doubt there is, in aggregate terms or in number terms, even if we have a larger population now, in number terms, he's saying this is a higher level of interference and foreign engagement than we've seen, even in the Cold War. And I think that is something that the government needs to take seriously. Yeah,
chilling indeed, and we might hear from Peter Dutton very shortly on that. Let's look at the Financial Review. The headline, Pandemic Plan as Virus Spreads. Mark Kenny, we have Josh Frydenberg quoted as the eternal optimist there, saying once this outbreak is under control, our industries that are affected by it, travel, education, just to name two, will bounce back pretty quickly. What do you think the budget surplus is looking like at this point?
That's a very unknown question, isn't it? I mean, look, you hear it, depending on who you talk to around here in Parliament House, you hear different stories about this. There is a suspicion that perhaps the budget's not hit as badly as by all of these things, bushfire, drought, the coronavirus and whatever, that it's not as badly hit as, the general sort of discourse would suggest, and that therefore the government will unveil some sort of small surplus as planned, maybe not as big as was planned, but a surplus nonetheless in May when that budget gets handed down. We know governments like to have expectations low and then deliver high when it comes to budgets. Maybe that's the game we're involved in here. On the other, and we see that iron ore prices, for example, remain pretty good, remain very high, and that's a key revenue stream for the budget. But on the other hand, we do know that all of these things have hit the budget pretty hard, and that there is demand for the government to spend to keep the economy growing, to protect those sectors that are most vulnerable, and you named just a couple just then. and also to engage in that reconstruction effort as well. So there are many calls on the budget. We're just going to have to wait and see, but it's going to be a close-run thing either way, I think.
Mark, not too far from where you are right now, there was something of a brouhaha yesterday between Barnaby Joyce and Joel Fitzgibbon over climate change and net zero emissions. Front page of the Sydney Morning Herald today, it's zero or bust on Paris Agreement. And David Crowe has written an interesting piece an opinion piece today saying all the yelling in the world doesn't change the fact that Australia signed up to the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, that's true, but the government does seem to be shimmying away from the implications of that, or at least from stating what the implications of that are. We hear about this kind of technology plan that is, this roadmap that's going to rely heavily on technology that the government's going to release. We know, as you say, that the government has signed up to the Paris Agreement and that it has those 2030 targets. There's a whole lot of noise, as has been the case in this policy space for a long time. There's a whole lot of noise and division over this, but we just don't know where the government's going to land. Nope. It's a very odd position for the government really to be arguing, although I think it has reason politically to think that it's going to pay dividends. But, it'd be like saying you shouldn't start, a university course because you don't know where it's going to end. I mean, there is a process you have to go to in order to get to the target, no matter what that target is, and whether you're doing it with, whether you believe you can do it with technology or whether you need to do it with an openly stated target. I think if it ends in the same place, then that's a good thing.
Yep, it is. And if it's doing your head in at home, you are not alone. Don't worry. It's been 10 years or more of this. We're going to leave it there, but on this happy note, we just want to leave you with this, Mark Kenny.
This is the country where your people cheer on some of the world's greatest cricket players, from Sachin Tendulkar to Virat Kohli.
As a cricket fan, I know you'll love that one, and I hope you enjoyed that at home.